Hello everyone, this is Ishita Agarwal. Welcome you all in today's session on Achieve, Release and Deployment Process Excellence with BMC Remedy ITSM. So, before starting with the session, just take a brief look on the agenda which we would be covering on our today's session. Today, we would be discussing about the release management. We would be taking a look at the release request lifecycle, the various form views which are there in the release management process, the various roles involved in the release management, the approvals involved in release request, and obviously the release management task. Now let's begin with the introduction of release management. So what is a release management? Release management is the process responsible for planning, scheduling and controlling the movement of releases to test and live environment. This is totally built on the ITIL specifications. So, according to ITIL, the primary objective of release management is to ensure that the integrity of the live environment is protected and the correct components are released. Before moving further with the release management discussion, we should all be knowing the meaning of term release. So what is a release? Actually, the release stands for a collection of related authorized changes to an IT service that are tested and introduced into the live environment together. And when we are talking about the release, we should actually be knowing what all type of releases are there in a release request process and when we'll be using that actually. So, we could have full, delta, package and backlog release types in a release request. Talking about the first release type, that is the full, we would be using this release type when all the components of the releases are built, tested and deployed together. So if we want to make sure that the release or version of an application plus the necessary CI components to run the application are all linked throughout the entire process. Now coming next to the next release type, that is Delta 1, which includes only incremental changes and only those components or CIs that need to be included in the release. When we'll be using this? Obviously, we would go for that when our application was moving from version 1.0.00 to 1.1.00. The next release type, that is the package, which includes all individual full and delta releases together and form a packaged release. We use package release type if we combine several minor and major updates together. Now, coming to the last release type, that is backlog, which is actually providing us a method to identify and review multiple changes, incidents and problems that are candidates to target to implement in a release. This release type is a grouping mechanism that our change advisory board uses as their candidates to review for future releases. As a part of BMC's business service management strategy, the release management module is included with BMC Remedy Change Management, which is built in ITIL V3 best practices to track and manage change and deployment activities. So now we can conclude this that the goal of release management is to provide enhanced out-of-box support for managing standard release activities from request to planning and design, building, testing, deployment and obviously the acceptance. Now we could all come to a common point that when we have change management process running in our service provider environment, why actually we need to have release management? So the answer could be, with numerous changes occurring daily, Release management is the key component in making sure that applications are successfully deployed without compromising the integrity or availability of the production environment. And obviously, if I am using the word changes here, that refers to the ones that are already authorized by the change management process. Now, using a systematic and repeatable release process, organizations can achieve greater success rates of change rollout, higher quality of IT service, and accelerated time to market. Now, after understanding these concepts, release request processes concept, we could now come to the point that what are the various roles that are involved in a release request process. So, as every deployable application has roles behind it, we have the roles as release coordinator, change manager, task implementer, and activity assignee. So coming back to our first role that is involved in a release request process, what does a release coordinator performs in a release request? So the release coordinator would be the one who would be reviewing the request for change for the services for which he is acting as a release coordinator after they have been passed on from the change management. He is actually splitting the requirements of releases into logical groups that can be handled efficiently by change managers. He also prepares a business case for a new release when additional funding is needed for its implementation. He initiates the implementation of releases and decides on corrective actions as needed. And finally, he organizes and conducts post-implementation meetings to collect improvement suggestions for future releases. So this is the work which release coordinator performs during a release request. Now, as we know, this release process is closely linked with the change management processes. So we have the next role as a change manager. As we have earlier discussing the point that a release is actually a combination of related authorized changes. So for that associated change request, we have the role of change manager. He would be the one who would be reviewing the risk and impact analysis to make sure that this has been performed thoroughly. He also ensures that the appropriate actions have been planned to minimize both the risk of failure and the impact on the users during change implementation. He ensures that the timing of planned implementation does not conflict with other planned changes or events. And finally, he would be obtaining approval for the changes. Then, as we have discussed, the release can have multiple change requests, and for that we have the role of change manager. Likewise, a change request could have multiple tasks associated with it. So for that, we have the role of task implementer. So task implementer would be obviously a support staff member who would be performing the task associated with a change request. You can take up an example as if I have a task of installation of new server. So I would be assigning this installation of new server task to a task implementer, and his responsibility would be to install the new server. So he uses the change management console to perform the installation task which is associated with the change request. Now coming to our last role, which is activity assignee. As if we have the concept of having change request and a release request, likewise we could have a number of activities which are associated with a release request. So the staff members or the groups who perform these activities which are associated with the release request are known as activity assignees. For example, a release request is something about the installation of a new software application. So it could relate some activities as if like, it could have the activities as if creation of new training materials, train the employees on the software application, and so on. So for that purposes, we'll be giving this task to the activity assignees.